And we're live. Okay. Thank you very much to Flights of Foundry and everybody who is watching this talk. My name is Rob Kenzie, and I am a producer and writer for Dire Destiny Books and Dire Destiny Media. You can check our stuff out at diredestiny.com. And I'm here to talk about adventure design for D&D and other role-playing games. I'm going to be using an adventure that I published called The Tomb of Haggemoth, which has been published twice, once the original back in 2006 and in 2020. I got together with a friend of mine, Jonathan Stark, over at the Alignment May Vary podcast, and the two of us worked on a 5th edition update for it, which is currently available on DM's Guild. So that's the plug out of the way. So let's talk a little bit about adventure design and writing adventures for RPGs. Let's set the Wayback Machine for about 2000, just to give a little context to this. One of the things that inspired me to get back into this kind of thing, I had been away from RPGs for quite a while, but there was and is a website called rpgmp3.com. And I believe that they were the first people to start, if they were not, if not the first, they were like one of the first people to start streaming or rather podcasting actual play of role-playing games, various kinds, mostly Dungeons and Dragons, mostly 3.5 at that particular time. In fact, the project which got me hooked over there was where they were planning to do a review by playing through a project that AEG published, I believe, called The World's Largest Dungeon, which was a huge fiasco of a mega dungeon that was published by AEG, a really wacky publication, huge, something like 20 or 25 levels, and the book was like that thick. And the fellow who runs RPG MP3 is a guy named Hal Halpin, and he and his crew they were extremely entertaining. They were having a blast playing it, and after I had not been playing role-playing games for 5 or 10 years or something like that, I was like, why have I been away from this so long? I need to get back into this. I need to start doing this again. So that got me hooked and started me running games again for my friends. And I was so enamored that I actually reached out to Hal because I had done quite a bit of writing. I'd been a writer on a graphic novel series called Dire Destiny, which is obviously that's where the publishing company gets its name from. And I had done quite a bit of other writing as well. So I reached out to Hal, and I had done some game design before, and I had talked to him and said, hey, I would really, really, this AEG project, you guys are having a blast with it. But you keep complaining about how poorly designed it is and how badly written it is. AEG doesn't need my permission to go and do interesting things. I mean, it was an interesting project, certainly, but Hal really was not impressed with it. You keep complaining about this adventure. I would love to write an adventure for you. And he was like, well, hey, that sounds like a good idea. So we had a little bit of a partnership there where I was going to write this thing. Honestly, I don't think he thought I would actually do it. I think he kind of just said yes to be polite, but then I went ahead and actually did it. So the Tomb of Haggemoth. So how did it start? The Tomb of Haggemoth was kind of my homage to old school first edition D&D style adventures with a bit of a twist. One of the things that I had always, kind of loved, but at the same time was a little bit frustrated by in older adventures, is that the adventure always started kind of at the door of the dungeon, like especially stuff like the Tomb of Horrors, the Ghost Tower of Inverness, that kind of thing. You start at the door of the dungeon, and it's like, how did you get there? How did you find this place? How did you learn about this? It was all about like getting you right into the dungeon. And I thought, there's a whole adventure to be had, like getting there. I mean, like, how does everybody know where the Tomb of Horrors is? It's the last tomb on the right as you head out of town? No. And I had in my mind, I'd been rewatching the Indiana Jones movies and thinking about that whole idea of the adventure being getting to this mystical place, this fantastic place, and having this sort of episodic type adventure that happens along the way where you're collecting clues to try and find the location of the actual tomb or dungeon that you're trying to get to in the first place. And along the way, you have lots of fun. So that is what started me designing this adventure with the idea that, okay, this is going to be something where it's basically it's about the journey and it's about how you get from point A to point B. And that would mean that in order to make that an interesting journey, there would have to be multiple paths between those 2 points, um, so that the people who are, the players who are working through the adventure have some kind of choice, or at least the illusion of choice, in terms of how they handle the problem that's put before them, so that every single time this adventure is run, it can always come out just a little bit differently because there's multiple ways to get from point A to point B. Pardon me. So, um, when I first started putting together the design brief for this, I actually there was a previous iteration of this adventure. Um, BioWare, I don't know if you folks remember, there was a game of Neverwinter Nights that BioWare published in the late 90s, early 2000s. It was about the same time. And of course, one of the big cool parts of that was the toolkit that they included with it for designing your own adventures and designing your own dungeons and that kind of thing. I was definitely hooked on that. I was always, messing around with that. So a lot of environments in what would become Tomb of Haggemoth actually started in with me messing around with BioWare, with BioWare's Neverwinter Nights engine, and trying to see how to put together interesting environments. Because again, in a game where getting there is half the fun, that's one of the things that you have to keep in mind, that you want to have interesting environments, sort of like epic environments, something that's on the extreme side of things, something that's going to be memorable. Um, so in order to sort of like make this journey feel more non-linear than it actually was, I decided to do something that is called sort of like a hub and spoke style of adventure design, where you have a sort of like a central hub location that the players either start at or spend a lot of time at, and then they go out from that and come back to it, and then go out and come back to it again in order to get where they're going. And because this is a journey, the idea came to me that, well, of course, that the hub for this would be a ship, which makes this a kind of a nautical adventure. Um, so the idea of having the ship as the hub really kind of like that really set the tone for the whole thing. So the idea was that, okay, so the players are on a ship and the ship is going to go from one place to another. And there was the idea that in the middle section of this adventure, there were going to be at least 3 locations, because 3 is a magic number. There are going to be 3 locations that the players could go to, but they didn't have to go to them in a particular order. And in fact, because there was one of the ways that I worked this out, there's a sort of like a gamified problem called the traveling salesman problem, where you have to try and hit certain locations and you have a certain amount of time to do it in. So the adventure has a bit of a ticking clock built into it. Um, I should talk a little about the premise of the adventure in order for this all to make sense and for the examples to make sense. So the premise of the adventure is that all of the players are familiar with this old kind of like dotty bard friend of theirs who has he's definitely an adventure hunter, and he's loves reading old books, and he's basically he's known for going on wild goose chases. And the backstory at the beginning of the adventure is that all of the players, all of their characters know this guy. They've all worked for him in the past, going on really horrible adventures where nothing worked out as planned, and obviously, things went terribly wrong. The treasure didn't turn out to be whatever it was, but like that every time they've worked with him, it's a wild goose chase. But he really needs their help now, and he's calling them in the hopes that they'll come in and they'll help him out with something. He's found a lead on a really fabulous treasure. Unfortunately, in the process of getting to find out about this treasure, he has had to read certain books, and in reading one particular book, he has become cursed. And unless the tomb is found within a certain amount of time, he is going to die. So that gives the players a little bit of a ticking clock. In order to endear the players to this character, one of the things that I did in the adventure is that at the start, before even the adventure begins, everybody gets a little sort of like a token bonus that's given to them by this NPC, so that they have a little bit of a connection to him. So just a little bit. All right, so he's before the adventure's even begun, he's done something for the characters. He's done something for the players to give them a little bonus to use on this adventure. So that gives them a little bit of a connection to him. It gives them a reason to care about him. And then and the fact that he's dying and needs their help, is the sort of like the kick in the pants to get them off and running off onto the adventure. And in order to find this tomb that needs to be opened, in order for him to survive, there are clues that are scattered about a number of islands and locations at sea, and the players have to go one to the other to the other. Um, they are given a prophecy that has the locations of the clues in it. They are given NPCs that will help point them in the right direction so that they know where to go. But they aren't given any sense that any one of these clues takes precedence over the other. It's not a linear thing where first you go to A, then you go to B, then you go to C. It's you need A, you need B, and you need C, and it doesn't matter what order you get them in. And the A, B, and C are all in extremely different environments. One's in a frozen wasteland far to the north. One's in the middle of a completely blasted desert off to the east, and the third one is in a library on a bleak, sparsely populated island somewhere in the middle of the ocean. And then all of these clues point to a further island, which is the final location of the tomb. And then, of course, when you get there, then there is more obstacles to get through. Just when you think you're almost there, there's one more thing you got to go to. You've got to go up the river, overland to get to this place because it's in the interior of the island. Like, okay, now we've gone up the river. But just before you get into the tomb, there's one other thing you've got to do. That turns out that there's like an old fortress over the tomb that's been taken over by hobgoblins. And so we've got to get through that. And then you're in the tomb. And one of I don't want to spoil too much about the adventure in case people out there want to read through for themselves, but we are talking about design. So one of the things that informed the design, though, was that Hal and a number of the people who were playing with him on RPG MP3 had gone to University for Archaeology. So in the course of writing through the adventure, not very successfully. It wasn't like a major bit of the design brief, but it was there to try and incorporate things, elements of actual archaeology into this dungeon crawl at the end. So the tomb actually has the tomb tells a story. In the various rooms that you go to, each room has some kind of clue in it about the personality of the person that this tomb was built for, and that turns out to become hugely important at getting a sense of who this person was, because at the very end of the adventure, Haggemoth it's the tomb of Haggemoth. Haggemoth is a dwarven wizard who was kicked out of his culture by the Thanes for messing around with arcane stuff that dwarves shouldn't mess with, and he basically was rejected by his culture. And at the end of the adventure, you have to make a choice about Haggemoth and how you feel about him. And that choice is about whether you're going to do something to sort of restore Haggemoth and restore his legacy, or leave it as it is and do something that serves yourself. And so another one of the elements, because that notion of a really big choice at the end of the adventure was another part of the design brief that cascaded backwards into these other locations on the way to the final destination, where at each of these locations where you're getting a clue, there was also a choice to be had, where there's a way for the characters, the adventurers who are going on this adventure, to get what they need with or without addressing some kind of a bad situation that's going on where they are. So there are people in need at each of these locations, and it's up to the adventurers. You can help these people, which makes getting what you want a lot harder, or you can just get what you want and go and don't worry about these people. And each of these choices that the players have to make along the way prepares them for this final major choice, which is the final sort of like set piece of the adventure. So let's go ahead and just because I've got I've got it here. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share here, and I'm just going to show you a little bit of the difference in the original publication and the updated publication. If anybody has any questions, who may be watching, you're welcome to put it. There's a Discord for this room at the Flights of Family Discord. We're in Toast B, I believe. So you can go in there and you can leave a question. I'll be checking in on it periodically. So if you have any questions about the design or about how this project got started or where it ended up, just go ahead and drop it in there and I will try and get to that. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen here. Not that, that's not share screen, that's mute. All right. So here we go. So let's go on over here. So this was the original Tomb of Haggemoth. It was this was just a labor of love that I did. This was the one that was done in conjunction with RPG MP3. We split some of the proceeds on it. It's actually been podcast multiple times, which is kind of funny. So RPG MP3, they podcast it once, and then another group at RPG MP3, because they wound up diversifying to several different podcasting groups. Another group took a run at Tomb of Haggemoth, and then I've seen it done, I think, at least 2 other places where people have done some kind of podcast related to it, which has made me really proud to know that there are people out there who are doing a lot with it. And every time I love listening to other people go through this, because it always surprises me the kind of approaches people take. So there's a little blurb about Dire Destiny. So this is kind of like what the original document looked like, and it's very old school. These maps are really kind of crude. The maps were actually done in Microsoft Excel, believe it or not, a combination of Excel and Photoshop, which is really it was silly. It was very silly. So here's part of the design document that is kind of interesting. So here we've got a graph of travel times between places. So one of the things about this adventure was that there's no like world map with this. It's not really a campaign setting. It's not meant to be that, but there are a lot of locations that the players have to go to, and they have to get there in a certain amount of time. So if you look at this, chart, and I'll go ahead, I think I can blow this up a little bit bigger to make it more interesting, at least more legible. You can see that I decided to put everything in terms of time, and like the time it takes to get from place to place. So they know that they have a limited amount of time in order to find the tomb before Xanatos is no more. He's the character that they're trying to save. So what we did here is that here are all the different places that they need to go, that they're going to be traveling between, and each of them will take a certain number of weeks. And for every week, you can there's tables that you can roll on for encounters. And this is basically the crux of the problem that the players face in terms of like the sort of traveling salesman problem. How do we hit all the locations we need to hit within the amount of time that we have to hit these locations? What's the most effective use of our time? Did we talk to the NPC that we need to? We have to go back. We have to backtrack and go someplace we've already been to get someone or something that we didn't know we needed before. So we have to go back, and then we have to, figure out where the next place we're going to go is. So that is, one of the ways to keep the design interesting in terms of, having the players have a challenge that's just based into just getting around. And then, of course, at every place there is a challenge. And then there were tables, of course, random encounter tables for things happening at sea. And the idea was to make the journey kind of picaresque and very full of incidents. Some of the incidents would be combat incidents. Some of them would be, like role play incidents. They wouldn't all be deadly. Some of them would just be annoying. Some of them would just be interesting. So that was one of the things with this table. So you had strange things happening, like for instance, and the original document, the original version of it was a little bit more jokey than the update did. But just like if you look at this table down here in the corner here, this one here, if a ship is sighted, roll on this table, and like one of them down here is a chartered ship containing a number of other adventurers who are on their own quest going off to do something else. And the idea is that these guys are, they have their shit more together, and they're much more prepared than you are. And But there's a lot of different ways you could run that encounter. But it's like the idea, oh, hey, you're on an adventure too, and it's just that kind of like interesting things to happen, while the party is at sea. Um, there is a recurring villain of the piece. These guys, the Razzoto pirates, who are a bunch of sea thieves who are operating in the area that the party is moving around into, and so that's baked into the narrative too. So as they go along their journey, they're going to run into these guys in a couple of different places, and eventually they're going to become part of one of the different challenges that they're going to face while they're getting clues on the way to the final destination. And let's see. So again, part of making travel interesting. This is another thing that we had to do here. I want to touch on this. So one of the challenges is finding this another tomb, unrelated to the tomb that they're looking for. But there's one of the clues they need is in another tomb called the Pit of Thud in the middle of this desert, which is a total wasteland. Um, and there's a reason for that because the environment of that dungeon is quite interesting. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the idea is that it's in the middle of this place where there's no water, there's no plants, there's no life, there's just rocks and sand and wind, and the party has to get into the middle of this place, which has a curse on it, which is trying to force them back. And the challenge was how do you make that interesting? How do you make wandering through a featureless desert an interesting play experience? Um, difficult at best. Um, so what we went ahead and did is I went ahead and created a series of skill challenges with the idea that as the players went through, they could come up with different devious methods. There's a in the original version, it's different from what we did in the update, but in the original version, there's survival checks that have to be made. The difficulty of the survival checks is extremely high. So in order to get that, the party has to come up with lots of devious ways to stack bonuses. And the idea is that every time they do something interesting that the DM, and this is talked about here in the introduction to this section, but the idea is that for every time they do something interesting, the GM will throw on, okay, cool, we'll stack that bonus on, we'll stack that bonus on. And as their bonuses stack up, that helps them get to the end of the skill challenge that they need to do. So each of these, there's 4 rings of the desert. Each of them has its own kind of like weird happenings that go on. People see mirages and get gone off track. A lot of it is just, oh, you go for a few more days using up your food and water, because this is actually the only part of the adventure where I recommend that the DM actually bother tracking food and water, because that's the important part of this. It's this is the survival part of the adventure, and it's really only the place you need to do it. But the idea is, again, because there's a ticking clock, the party wants to do it in oh yeah, I know, like I saw someone mention, yeah, tracking food and water is my nemesis. Yes, it absolutely is. So this is the only place in the adventure I recommend doing it. So you got 2 things going on here. You've got the food and water problem, and you've also got the ticking clock, because the longer it takes to get through this desert, obviously the more time is passing, and the more your friend is in jeopardy. So there's 4 different sections, and it's totally possible that the party gets really lucky. They can crit the first roll and succeed on the challenge, and get through to the next section really easily, or they can have a series of bad rolls and wind up wandering around and around in circles as they desperately try and come up with new strategies to stack some more bonuses on to help them get through. And the challenges get easier and easier actually as they go along. The hardest challenges are in the outer desert, because again, the idea is that this is a curse that's pushing everybody away from the center of the desert. So they go through this series of challenges, and then they get to the desert. And this is actually a really interesting environment. I will talk about this one a little bit, even though it is a bit of a spoiler, because I had so much fun with this particular one. How to do survival roles without it being a possible bummer of a player kill is a question I see in the chat. Yeah. And again, it has to do with the fact that, and again, in the beginning of the section of this, I talk about how it's important. You have to tell the DM directly, you know, tell the players that this is where they can get creative. That the more creative things they come up with, um, as that will accrue them bonuses. And it is a way to sort of like get the players involved in in trying to come up to solve the problem, and have them talking to one another and get them working together to try and come up with new and interesting ways to tackle the problem of being lost in the desert. And I've had all kinds of things happen when I've run this session. Where like people have like summoned crazy creatures to help them get through it. They've used animal companions to help sniff out the way. They've used spells. They've used their own various skills. um, I've People have used um, like robusta speeches and what's the word I'm looking for, like pep talks and things for the rest of the party to keep morale up. The idea is to yes, yeah, to build it into the social contract of the game. Yeah, to just make it very, very evident to the players at the beginning. You know, this is where you guys be creative, and each time you do something cool, we'll stack on another bonus, and that'll make it easier for you to get through this. So that it's not just a series of, okay, we're just rolling and rolling and rolling. But obviously the dice still play a part, because the dice can, they can break your heart, or they can, do it really, they can do really well for you. Um, but Also the fact that there is the ticking clock on this builds intention to it as well. So the roll isn't just like, all right, well, we'll just roll again until we get there, because every roll is costing you time, and costing you food and water and resources, but mostly time. So that is one of the things that ratchets up the tension in this section. Pardon me. But I do want to talk about this environment. So when they get to the middle, they get to the Pit of Thuds. So the gimmick for the Pit of Thud is really interesting. So the idea is that this is a tomb of a weather wizard, a guy who was really into weather and wind and rain and lightning and all that kind of jazz. And he built an artifact that he could not control called the Rod of Storms. And when he died, he basically interred himself with the rod in this place to try and hide it away, to keep it from doing any more damage than it already did. And the idea was that the rod, like this land, this desert they were in, used to be a green and pleasant land, but the rod basically got out of control and sucked all the moisture and life out of it. And when the party gets to the Pit of Thud, it's a big hole in the ground, but when they go down into it, under the ground, there's an enormous cavern, and the cavern is full of water at the bottom. Like basically all of the water from the desert is in this cavern, sloshing around in the bottom of it. The dungeon itself is on platforms and bridges that are stretched over the watery space below. And there is a thunderstorm happening in the cave while the party is in there. So there is a constant thunderstorm in this cave. I just thought it's a really cool dramatic environment. And that's this is one of the reasons why I love writing adventures, because it gives you the opportunity to like come up with just like crazy stuff. So I'm really proud of this one. I've run this section of the adventure on its own at conventions sometimes. It's a lot of fun. Uh, let's see. So what else can we? Why don't we let's go ahead and move on. I'm gonna bop on over to this other. So this is the update. I'll talk a little bit about that now. And as we go through, we'll talk a little bit more about the design. So Tomb of Haggemoth was originally published in 2006, the original version. And it was promoted via Dire Destiny. It was promoted at RPGMP3.com. It sold pretty well. It sold a lot of it at conventions, sold it at Gen Con. But that obviously there were always going to be things that I wanted to do differently. You're never really satisfied with a project, even after you release it. There's always things that you want to change. There's always things you want to do differently. So it was always in the back of my mind, especially after 5th edition came around, because I think after D&D 4th edition came out, I switched over to Pathfinder. And I did a lot of work for Pathfinder. I wrote a few game books third-party game books for Pathfinder. One's called The Very Last Book About Mounted Combat. Another one was called The Very Last Book About Alignment. One's called The Very Last Book About War. Where I was trying to sort of like work in, like subsystems of the game that weren't getting a lot of love. But especially when 5th edition came out, I started playing D&D again. 5th edition, I think, is probably the best edition of the game that I've played so far in terms of its ability to bring new players into the game and provide a really fun evening without getting bogged down too much in crunch the way 3.5 and Pathfinder were. I still love Pathfinder. I played Pathfinder 2nd edition too. It's a really great. I don't want to get into edition wars now, but they're all great games. They bring different things to the table. But in terms of getting like my kids more involved in the game and getting my friends more involved in the game, 5th edition really was a great opening, a great opportunity. So I was always thinking, oh, maybe I should go back and rewrite Tomb of Haggemoth for 5th edition. But it was one of those things. Was like, why do I want to do that? How am I going to do that? Well, this fellow named Jonathan Stark, who has a podcast called Alignment May Vary, which I believe you can find at alignmentmayvary.com or .net. I can't remember now. I think it's .com. Anyway, Jonathan got in touch with me. He reached out because he had run this for his group, and he had blogged the whole thing. And it was a lot of fun going through his book because I'll tell you, I don't know any DM, even with published adventures, I don't know any DM who runs the adventure as is out of, even the book that I wrote myself, I don't run this adventure as is out of the book. And Jonathan certainly didn't. And he had a lot of cool things that he did, for his version of the Tomb of Hagamoth. But he really loved it, and he got in touch with me, and he had me on the podcast. We talked about the design there, and we talked about the sort of philosophy of game design and philosophy of role-playing games. And he was like, hey, have you thought of doing a 5th edition version of Tomb of Hagamoth? I was like, yes, I've thought of doing it, but gosh, it's a lot of work, and I've got other things going on. I've actually, before 2020, I was in the few years before 2020, originally I started work way, way, way back in a previous life. I worked in Hollywood, and I was trying to break into movie making. Then I went off to do other things, and in the last 5 years, I've sort of trying to get back into movie making and doing short films, which you can find links to if you want to see my short films. They're at diredestiny.com if you look on the films section. But so that was one of the things that had sort of been taking me a little bit away from role-playing games. But then, the pandemic hit and everybody was stuck at home and I wasn't doing films anymore. And I was like, hey, Jonathan, yeah, maybe now's the time. Maybe we should do this now. And Jonathan and I got together and we talked about, things that we would change and how to update the game. And the fact that if I was going to do this, I wanted to make it look spectacular, or at least as spectacular as I could. So we went all out. And I'll just sort of get into it. We wanted to make it look, as cool as possible in terms of just the design of the book. We had no art budget, which is why I had to go for all public domain, artwork from, the Renaissance is full of absolutely fantastic artists, and I put them to work. But and in fact, at the end, there's actually an art credit section at the very end of the book where I list all of the different paintings and artists who were used, and there was some original art done for this as well. It isn't all just sort of public domain art, but the maps, we did a lot better on the maps than we did before, and we did just a lot better on the design. So let me show you a couple of things that we added that we didn't have before. One of the things that was interesting is that this was a fun little thing to add. So Xenatos is the character again who's the instigator of this adventure, and again I wanted to keep the beat where before the adventure even begins, you get something from him that endears you to him so that you care about the fact that he's under a curse and the fact that he's dying. So we came up with these little plot coupons that at the very beginning, you would get a random coupon from Xenatos that you could turn back into the DM for a free reroll at any point during the game. You turn this back in, and each one of them is inspiration from Xanatos, like how you know him, like what you did before. And so these are all sort of like little pastiche adventure beats from various different that are sort of like little homages to old school adventures. Xanatos and I battled the frost giant of the White Rift to obtain his legendary ice scepter, which promptly melted when we returned to the south. That kind of thing. That gives you an idea of who Xanatos is, what his adventures are generally like, and why he's calling on you right now. What's another one here? Xanatos convinced me to help him plunder the treasure vaults of the lobster god, which turned out to contain mostly cowrie shells and exotic sponges. That kind of thing. So let's move a little bit further along in the adventure. Here's the ship that is the hub of the adventure, the Manky Bastard, which is that's a nod to a ship from Larry Niven's Ringworld novels, which is called the Lying Bastard. And again, we have the chart showing travel times, and we when we went back to like the encounters at sea, we tried to vary them up more. In the original one, there were a lot of just sort of like generic, monster encounters, but we really added a lot more sort of like interesting encounters, including some like let's see if we had what's one of the ones here? Like there's one here where the PCs find a starving man floating on a raft. Once rescued, he begins pronouncing portents of gloom and doom on the party and generally brings down the mood of the entire crew. And he's just an annoying guy that you pick up at sea. But there's one where there's a nod to the rhyme of the ancient mariner, where an albatross lands on the bridge, and if you shoot it, then the crew is cursed. Another one where there's a treasure chest bumps into the boat, and there's a monkey's paw inside of it, which is a cursed item. And we had a lot of fun with like sort of like, I'm going to say, interesting magic items. I'm a big fan of magic being magic can feel really safe in D&D because it tends to work the same way every time. A magic missile spell works the same way every time you use it. The magic items work reliably. But I'm a big fan of magic items that are more magical, for want of a better word, that are more transactional, that are more, yes, it'll do something for you, but it'll extract a price from you, kind of thing. So we had a lot of fun revisiting some of the items I put in here. The Rod of Storms from the Pit of Thud, that's an artifact which you can take out, and it has all these kind of like crazy, amazing abilities, but it is also extremely hard to control. And as long as you're carrying it, it is going to rain on you wherever you go. You're under a curse so that you will never see a sunny day again. It will always be raining wherever you go because you're carrying the Rod of Storms, of course. All kinds. In the original, we didn't put this in the update, but in the original one, there was a scroll of the spell Unseen Servant, but it was improperly copied. So the part that made the servant invisible was missing. So instead, it was a seen servant. And it turns out that the servant is a creature of eldritch horror that just to look on it will make you, crazy with fear, and everybody runs away from it. Just like nutty things like that. And strange magic items that create opportunities for role play, because that is, and again, and I think actually that's a good thing to talk about right here, is that everything that I put into the book was geared towards, let's create an opportunity for role play. If there is an NPC, they're not just there to give you information. They have problems. They have opinions about things. If you're there on a quest, they have like when you show up to the frozen tundra to go battle the giants on the mountain that's oppressing the village, the villagers have things to say about that, because some of the villagers are like, yes, we really want to, you to go and take care of the giant. But then there's a lot of other villagers who are like, no, don't piss off the giant, please. He'll come down and he'll kill us all if you fail. So like this, so there would, the idea was, again, wherever the party goes, opportunities for role play. And that was part of every decision that was made going into this, into writing the adventure. It's not just collect the plot coupons, kill the monster, get to the place, disarm the trap, go through. The traps have story to them. Like the tomb at the end. And in fact, let's go ahead and let's skip ahead to the tomb at the end. For the Pit of Thud, for the new version, we did an isometric map, which I think really gives a really great idea of what it's supposed to look like. But let's go ahead and get to the end. Boy, we've only got a few minutes left, so I want to hit a few of these things. So like, yeah, whoops. All right, sorry, it's a PDF trying to keep up with it. Here's the journey up the river. You get a little map that shows the party, okay, you just follow the river to the tomb, right? And on the map, there's only one river going to the tomb. But of course, when the party actually gets there, the river branches and goes all over the place, and the party has to decide, now we have a problem. And again, it's all about that time pressure. And then there's like Tomb Gatehouse, and which really got beefed up. So like, here's the false tomb. So, and again, it says the false tomb because, hey, guess what? It's not really a tomb. The tomb is just there to make everybody think that Haggemoth was dead when really he was doing something else. But like at the entrance, like this section of the tomb here at the beginning, there's these rooms, and each of the rooms has like a trap or something going on, and it's something that's the party can manipulate. But each of these rooms also tells you something about Haggemoth. The design of the trap tells you something about Haggemoth. The way that it's all arranged tells you something about the personality of the guy who put this place together. And all of the traps in this false tomb, and this false tomb is very much a kind of an homage to the Tomb of Horrors in its own way. With the traps, are not nearly as deadly though. But the traps are arranged in such a way so that it's obvious that the traps are trying to get you out of here. The traps are trying to say, go away, don't be here, like get out, basically. And if the party persists, then they get to the final room of the false tomb, and that sends them into where are we going here? That gets them into the actual last part, which is the sanctum underneath the tomb, which is where Haggemoth, spent his last days, and basically something horrible happened while he was down there as he was trying to rehabilitate himself. And the party going through this section is even more of the story of Haggemoth, and there's lots of clues about what was he doing, why was he doing it, and what is the party going to do about it when they get to the final section. And I'll just leave you with an image. If I can find it. Where's the image? It's here somewhere. There we go. A giant set of balance scales on which Haggemoth's soul in the end turns out to be balanced. And that is gets us to the final choice, which kind of like it puts a whole nice little bow on the adventure. So again, we've only got a few minutes left. So if anybody has any questions that they want to ask, please go ahead and put them in the Discord room. We're in Toast B in the Flights of Foundry Discord. I'll scroll ahead and here's some of the treasure that's involved there. The section on NPCs and foes. I had a lot of fun designing the NPCs and foes. Here we go. Question: when you actually run this, how hard do you lean on the ticking clock aspect? So I let the players take the lead there. I believe that they're given 6 months in order to do this. So it seems like a lot of time at the beginning. Oh, we got 6 months. We've got plenty of time. But then as they start going from place to place, they realize, oh, it's going to take us 3 weeks to get here. Oh, it's going to take us 2 weeks to get here. If they do things, I'm not going to say wrong, but if they do things in a particular way, then at one point they're going to have a 5-week journey from one location to another location. And so that tends to eat up the time really quickly. And as time goes on, they realize, oh crap, I as a GM, you're constantly reminding them, okay, this is here's the date when you started. This is eventually rewards keeping track of time and keeping track of the calendar. I always use like a regular modern calendar. I don't make up a fantasy calendar for my world, but obviously you could do that if that's your bag. I find that it's just easier for the players to have an understanding of the nature of how much time is passing if you use a calendar that they're familiar with. Um, but yeah, that ticking clock aspect is a big part of it. So, and again, it's up to the players how strongly they feel about it. Let me go ahead and just go ahead and skip to the end and see what there's a section on the Ratsoto Pirates. We really upgraded the Ratsoto Pirates for the new version. So we have 3 different pirate ships with 3 different captains who have like their own distinct personalities. Do you find that players enjoy that as a limitation often? I find that it gets them to care a little bit more. It gets them to think a lot more about what they are doing and how they're doing it. And it promotes engagement with the adventure, is what I find. What's a detail of this adventure that you really enjoy, are proud of designing, but might not be immediately noticeable to a player? Ooh, that's a good one. Um, hmm. Um, okay. There's one section which is the library sections, the Library of Selenos. And one of the interesting things about it is it's an extremely complex environment because it has several different, I guess I'll say, factions. It has several different groups of individuals on, in, and around that part of the adventure who all have different wants, desires, needs, attitudes that interact. It's the most complex one. It's definitely set up as a living environment. Um, and as the players go into that environment, they have to decide how much they want to engage with that. So again, the whole adventure is designed so that like you can go through this adventure with very, very little in the way of cut. Like it's possible, and that was one of the design briefs, and I talk about that at the beginning of the adventure too, is that there are you don't just have to fight your way out with the monsters. The monsters will negotiate. You can be stealthy. There's ways to get through this. I'm sure there is a. I haven't done it. I haven't run a group that's done it yet. I'll give that caveat, but I am positive that there is a way to get through this adventure without ever getting into combat. You probably are not going to solve a lot of people's problems. You're probably going to be just grabbing what you need and getting out without engaging with some of the plot if you do that. But that was one of the things that I wanted to make sure was in this adventure, that there were lots of opportunities to find ways around a fight if you wanted to. Let's see, we're still running out of time. Let's see. Oh, we have a couple of different backgrounds in here that we put in for characters: a Tomb Raider background and a Castaway background. Here's some of the cool magic items. The Helm of Foolhardiness is a wonderful item. You put it on your head. It gives you a bonus to your armor class, and then it makes you immediately want to rush into the most dangerous situation imaginable. The Rod of Storms, a huge blurb on the Rod of Storms because of all the crazy things it does. Severed Monkey Paw, all kinds of crazy things. This is a really cool bit of design, which we don't have time to talk about. I'm going to have to do like a whole different supplement at one of these days. I'm a big fan of making a spell book into a dungeon. A spell book as a little side quest in and of itself. This is a spell book that I've put in the adventure. You can see it's got 100 pages of stuff, and depending on where you turn to it, like crazy stuff happens. In addition to just like having spells in it, it's got traps in it, it's got monsters in it, it's got all kinds of like wonderful little details, and there's a story through line as well. So before we head off, here's the blurb on the back cover. There you go, alignmentmayvary.com. You can check them out as well. If you go to diredestiny.com, you can catch some of my other books. Hammer on Stone Poetry, The Dwarves is a really cool little poetry book, supplement book that's got dwarven poetry in it, which is actually a really nice companion piece to this adventure because it's about a dwarven wizard. The very last book about alignment was written for Pathfinder, but it's a lot of it, what's in there applies, whether you're playing whatever edition you're playing. So that's a book I'm really proud about. Let me go over to let's see. Yeah, if you go to diredestiny.com, you'll find more information about myself, the projects I'm working on, and you can check out the short films that I've been working on over the last 5 years. There's some really cool stuff there, and I would encourage you to go check it out. And that, I think, brings us to about the end of this session. We have 2 minutes left. If there's any last questions, we can grab that. But I don't think anybody else has any questions. I'll go ahead and I'll stop the share on this screen here. Thanks so much to everybody who's tuning into this and to everybody who's watching it later on. Really appreciate you guys coming by and listening to my talk. Thanks again to Flights of Foundry for having me. And it's been an awesome online con. It's my first online con. It's been a great experience. So thank you to everybody. And I will turn this back over to the Flights of Foundry host, whose name I did not get, unfortunately. But again, thank you all for coming.